Hi everyone. I don't even actually know if we've got anyone watching. All right. Welcome. We're going to do another live critique here in the group. Now, if you can't stay and watch the entire critique, it is recorded and it stays right here in the group. And if you do a little search using the search bar, either to the left of your screen if you're on your computer, or at the top of your screen if you are on your phone or device, you'll be able to type in live critique and go back and watch all the critiques that I've done in the past. So yeah, hi everyone. Please don't be nervous. You have absolutely nothing to be nervous about. This is the best way for you to see your photo through someone else's eyes. If you were able to submit an image, and do you know what? I kind of felt a little bad the other day when it only took 3 minutes for all of the images to be uploaded and people started commenting and saying, oh, I missed out, and there were sad faces and all that kind of stuff. I would love to be able to offer this critique, to more people every month, but at the end of the day, it does take me anywhere from an hour and a half to go through all of the images that are submitted, so I can give each one a decent amount of time. But even if you didn't get a photo submitted, I do try to change the upload times each month, and I keep it quite random. So it's almost like a bit of a chance, a lucky kind of thing to be able to be online at the right time to get those photos submitted. I do put the dates up there, and I'll try and get a little more organized with letting everyone know, but it is a kind of first in, first served way that we do things. And it is so wonderful to see such a variety of work that does come through every single month. If you did not get a photo uploaded, please don't, it's even if they're not your images, you learn so much from this in terms of composition, lighting, posing, all of those things. I'm going to talk through all of these images and explain, what I see and how you could make some small improvements in your photos. But yeah, if I'm going to look off to the side here often, it's because there's a big TV screen, so I can see the comments coming through from everyone watching, but I cannot see who is leaving the comment. So I can see that we've got someone from Canada, someone from Melbourne. Come to Melbourne, please. I think I'm actually in Melbourne in August sometime. I'm going to be at the Canon Experience store, which is going to be very exciting. So I'm going to run some little workshops, mini workshops for Canon down there. We'll post more information as soon as we've got that available, which is going to be lots of fun. But for anyone that's watching in Perth, oh, how was the sloth? Oh my God, I love that sloth so much. Jenny. Hi, Jenny. I'm going to be in Perth on the 28th of July at a small photography event called Photo Live. So that's really exciting. They've got some amazing presenters that are going to be there. My good friend Tony Hewitt is going to be the MC, and I'm going to be giving a couple of little mini talks, doing some Q&As, and I think I'm doing a 2-hour workshop, but I'll be able to share more of that once I've got that information later today. So 28th of July for anyone in Perth that wants to come along to a photography event. It's always great to get out from behind your computer and network with like-minded people and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, how many have we got going on?
Oh, we're up to 59 now.
Holy shit, I better get started. Whoops, sorry.
It's early here.
I'm on my second coffee. It's 8:05 in the morning. Garrett and I like coming in early to do these because the rest of the staff start at 9 a.m. So it just means that we can get in early, a little less noise, and we're not disrupting everybody else. Okay, so each of these images, if you've not joined me before, are opened in Photoshop. I use my Wacom pen to kind of draw all over the images and talk a little bit about what I can see and where we can start to make some improvements. Alrighty, so we've got a beautiful mum and baby, and this is not working, Garrett.
The Wacom.
Here we go.
You back?
Hang on a minute. It's not actually, it's moving, but it's not doing anything in, here we go.
You got it?
Yep. We'll do it this way.
Bizarre. Gotta love technology.
Okay. This is Garrett's laptop too, by the way. So his settings are slightly different to mine, but that's okay. Anyway, so what I can see here is, we've got a beautiful intimate moment here between mum and baby. And one of the first things that I've spotted here is the crop. We've got a crop that's coming straight through the bottom of the baby's foot. We really do need to be careful and not chop through any limbs, arms, feet, hands, joints, anything like that. So cropping that just a little bit lower in camera to keep that entire baby's foot in, so that you don't have, quite a strong line and then a much brighter color at the bottom there in terms of the skin tone of the foot. Because if you have a look around the edge of the frame, the rest of it is quite dark, including the hair. So when you've got that brighter skin tone there at the bottom, it's going to lead your eye straight out of the frame. When we talk about cropping, we talk about composition, we want our eye to be led directly into the main focal point of the image, which is always the baby's face, or where that connection is happening. And in this case, it's where mum is kissing the baby's face. So one thing that I always do when I am posing babies in mother's arms is I actually pose the baby on this side with the body that way. And that way, with the light coming in from over here, we're not going to create any unflattering highlights and shadows. So as you can see here, we've got the light coming straight in this direction. We're highlighting the bottom of the nose, and then we're creating some darker sort of shadows here around the top of the nose and underneath the eyes. So if the light source is coming in from over here, you want to bring the baby's head to that side of the mum, and then you want to turn mum and the baby towards that light source on a 45-degree angle. That's going to give you a beautiful fall off of light across the baby's face and also across mum's face as well. And in this instance, what would have happened here is that mum's face would have then been turned this way towards the baby with her chin down, and therefore we would have seen more of her face because the hair would then be on the other side of her. What that would have done then is created what's called sort of shorter lighting there, in terms of turning the subject towards that light source and then you being further away from that light source. In this instance, it is still quite lovely, this connection, and I'm sure the parents absolutely adore this photograph. But in terms of creating a moodier kind of look, turning them towards that light source on more of an angle would have really helped here. Also, what I'm seeing here is really bright fingers on the hand there as well. So they are the brightest part of this image, other than the little tie here and on the baby's pants. But that is much brighter than the baby's face. So it is pulling my eye towards that hand before the baby's face. And the connection is here. This is what you want to look at, not so much the hand behind that baby's face. So you do need to be careful with that. I'm just going to bring up here as well my history palette. Alrighty. And I'm going to bring the histogram out here so we can see that a little more. Alright, but in terms of the way mum is holding the baby, the baby looks comfortable. The hand placement is really gentle with mum. We've got a little piece of hair coming down here and sort of covering one of the hands over here, which seems to be disjointed from the body because of the disconnect in terms of the placement of that hair. So just be careful of all of those things. But yeah, also, a really great tip when posing mums with babies is you can see here that she's really holding that baby up. She's got those shoulders up quite high. What I do is I get them to come down, and I ask them first to just close their eyes and breathe in their baby. And when you do that, take a deep breath. Now I want you to relax your shoulders. When they relax their shoulders, it elongates the neck. What happens then is it makes them look a lot less tense, and you can usually get them to bring their chin forward more when they bring their shoulders down. So really great tip there when you are posing the baby on the mum. Excuse me. Alrighty, so let's move on to our next image. Oh, skin tones look good. Just be careful with a little bit of a difference in the skin tone there in terms of the feet, the hands, and the face, but in terms of those nice warm skin tones. Alrighty. First thing this is such a cute baby. First thing I am noticing though is the size of that baby's head in comparison to the body. if we have a look here, and we go like this, and then we come down here, and this is the bottom and the feet. The baby's bottom is so much smaller than the head. So what's happened here is, with the choice of lens and the focal length there, we've distorted the baby so much that the head looks a lot larger than than the rest of the baby. If you have a look also at the face, the size of the face here, and then you have a look at the top of the baby's head, that's a much larger area. So it is quite distracting. When we look at focal length, you really do have to be careful when you're photographing babies because they're so small. Now, if you're using a wide angle lens, so for example, if this is my lens and this is a wide angle, to fill the frame, I've got to come in really close. When you come in really close, you then start to distort everything as you push it towards the edge of that frame. With that longer focal length, what happens is you flatten the image per se, and you start to put all of the features, like the rest of the arms, the legs, the ears, the nose, all of those things back into perspective. And it is so much more flattering, and it makes things look like they should. So when I'm photographing babies, I use a 24 to 70 mil lens. Now, even though it's a zoom lens, I'm pretty much fixed at 70 mil the whole shoot, unless I have to zoom out. For example, if I'm shooting a prop on the ground and I've got to fit the whole thing in, and I'm not going to stand on something above a baby because it's dangerous. So what I'm trying to do is create a little bit of distance between me and the subject, but because I'm zoomed in at 70 mil, I'm not going to create as much distortion as a wide angle lens because I've got that distance between me and I'm flattening those features. It is such a huge difference. You don't often see it though until you compare it. So I would love for you to try two lenses during a shoot and put those photos in the same setup side by side, or if you've got a zoom lens, to try that. But that longer focal length is designed for portrait photography. It's what portrait photographers use, and just because we're photographing babies does not mean we're not portrait photographers. We've got a free lens video. It's on YouTube. If you go to my YouTube, or you go to YouTube, type in Kelly Brown, there is a lens video and explains everything to do with focal length. It explains aperture, it explains focusing, it explains all the different lenses that are available. You've got prime lenses, zoom lenses, and yeah, just go and watch it. It's such an incredible video, and it's free. It goes for something like 50 minutes, but it's got so much information in there. And I even shoot my fake baby with all of those different focal lengths. Really, really important. Other than that, I love the pose. The camera angle and the crop. We've got a baby sort of coming down here, and I don't know why. Can you have a look at that?
Let's see if I can get this working for you.
Yeah, because I'm using the trackpad. But you've got the baby on such an angle coming down there, and you've got a large sort of space here, and then a large space at the back of the baby. So if you just turned that camera to the right a little more and balance that baby up just a tad, and then sort of create a little bit more space here at the bottom. Balance that baby out so it didn't look like it was on a full slope, because then when you go into your rule of thirds, you've got that baby, sort of sitting nice and comfortably there on that on the bottom 2/3 of the frame, and then coming through those axis points, which are great focal points for leading the line. Garrett's working. No, it's just not working there. I don't know what it is. I'll just keep using this. It's fine. Sure. Skin tones look great. The direction of light is lovely. Just be careful though that when the light is coming down, sort of more on top of the baby's head, you are going to highlight the top there and then the baby's shoulder. And as that chin tucks in, this is where the light is going to miss that area of the face, and you're going to create some darker shadows. So just bringing that light around a little more if it's artificial light, or or turning your posing bag towards that light source if it's natural light a little bit more. But the outfit and the styling and the backdrop is beautiful.
So it might be the lip.
All right. You know, compositionally, this is really quite striking. But the one thing I always say is that, you know, you might be able to pose a baby, you might be able to edit beautifully, but if the lighting is wrong, it's going to make or break a photograph. So what we can see here is that the light is coming in from the left there, straight up the baby's nose, and you can just see how bright that baby's nose is. And also the highlight here on the back of the wrist. But in doing that, when you have a look in here, this is what we call Gould's lighting, when the light comes straight up underneath the chin and it highlights the bottom of the nose and it creates those really dark shadows there underneath the eyes. This is probably one of the most unflattering ways to light a baby. So again, going back to that first image that we critiqued before, you want to be able to put the baby's head on the side that the light is coming in from and then turn on a 45-degree angle towards that light source. That's going to create more flattering light and shadow across the face. It's going to highlight those features beautifully. When we are looking at images like this, there's a fair bit of softening on the skin that's going in. So just be careful when you are using different skin softening techniques, whether it be, you know, using portraiture or different Photoshop actions that are out there. Just always make sure that you're not removing all of the texture of the skin and the detail. And you're not softening it so much that it starts to look sort of somewhat plastic or too smooth. Because then what happens is when we start to over sharpen the image, because we've softened it so much, we create a few problems in around the edge of the you know, the darker, more contrasting areas. You can see here how the eye and the nose and around the hands here, it's just been a little over sharpened. So do be careful of that. In terms of the placement of the baby in the parent's arms, it's really lovely. We've got a highlight here on the chest, which is sort of quite distracting, but we've got this very dark vignette going on around the outside of the image. Just be careful though that that dark vignette doesn't become so muddy and so heavy that it's distracting, that it's not adding to the image, it's not complementing the scene. So whilst it's great to be able to take some of those elements out, it's best to kind of do that with the direction of light that you use and also with cropping in camera. So keep that in mind next time you do it. Baby looks lovely and relaxed though, so I want you to I really want to encourage you to continue to sort of visit this setup because it is quite lovely. Just change that direction of light and be very careful with that skin softening and that over sharpening. Alrighty. First thing I noticed was that headband. We've got some bright highlights going on down here in the body, and we've got a teddy bear, which obviously means something to the family. I'm assuming that it was brought along with them for the shoot, which is lovely. But the thing that's really quite distracting is that headband. If the headband wasn't there, it would be about the connection between the baby's face and the teddy bear. So just be careful when you are adding different elements to an image that, like I just mentioned before, that they are contributing to the composition and the styling and not distracting, not taking your eye away from where it's meant to be, which is that beautiful little face. When we look at a composition like this, we've got the baby kind of coming across the top part of the frame. So this is where I would have potentially had the baby's head on this side and just somewhat rotated it up, because our eye leads and reads from left to right. So having that baby's head over in the top left-hand side and then having the body lead you into negative space on the right-hand side is always another option. Balances the frame out just a little bit. So yeah, also when you are photographing babies in props and things like that, just make sure that you get that perspective, that camera angle right above the baby. We always want to make sure that the baby's head is closest to the camera and the lens, because what happens is if the body is somewhat closer, then we can make that appear a lot larger than what it actually is. So this comes down to the way that the baby is positioned inside the prop, and also where you are positioned with your camera angle. So I always like to make sure that I've got enough space inside my props, inside my buckets, my bowls, little beds, boxes, things like that, so that you can put the bottom of the baby down a little bit lower and then elevate that head. That makes it a lot easier when you are coming above and shooting to get that baby's head closer to the light source. So just consider those things. But in terms of styling, you've done a great job. The direction of light is just one other little thing that I was going to point on. You can see that the light source is kind of coming in from down low. I would have had it kind of coming from a much higher perspective down across the baby's face. This would have directed the light from here, it would have hit the baby's face first and then sort of softened off as it fell across the rest of the baby, and therefore not making that white wrap as bright as what it actually is down here, because that light is coming in and hitting that area with a fair amount of intensity. So it's creating a brighter area in the image, which is distracting in terms of pulling your eye away from the baby. So if we have a little look at our histogram over here, which is what we always should have up on the back of our camera, you can see that here's our highlights over here and here are our shadows. A lot of the information in this frame is really pushed up quite high when you towards the edge here, which means it's so bright that they're very, very close to losing information in that area of the image. So just be careful when you are shooting babies on white, on cream, any tone that's brighter than obviously the baby's skin tone, because whilst you will have to somewhat underexpose the image to keep the highlights exactly where you want them and all of the beautiful detail in the texture of those highlights, you will have to then lift the skin tones later on in post-production. But if you, like I said, if you change the direction of that light so that it is coming down towards the top of the head, hitting the head first, and then falling off across those lighter areas, you will still be able to lift that exposure and get beautiful skin tones in camera as that light sort of falls off as it hits the rest of the baby. I hope that makes sense. I talk about all of that and getting it right in camera. So if you've got that, go back, re-watch it, and watch the part about understanding the histogram and that exposure and that direction of light, because it's so important. All right. The pinky tones in this are just lovely, and that baby looks really quite relaxed, and I love the little hand placement here on the chest. Styling is lovely. There's a little bit of over softening going on in the background, but I think that it's kind of also, it looks to me like it's been done on purpose. It looks like it's adding to the softness of and the look and feel that you're going for with this particular image. Don't often see a lot of square crops, so this is nice. The baby is in the center of the frame, which is lovely. One thing that I will add here is that if when filling the prop, it's very hard to see exactly what sort of prop it is, but it looks like a bowl of some description. But if you'd pulled out some of the stuffing underneath the baby's bottom will sink down further inside of the prop, and then you can create a little bit more of a curly shape with the baby, like that, in terms of the arch of its back. So if you sink that baby down a little lower into the prop, you'll be able to curl it up and bring those feet up and in a little more, so that the baby doesn't look so flat. That way you're not seeing such a large area here in terms of the stomach and the bottom half of the baby. You really want to curl it up and create more of a ball shape and around, instead of a flat sort of long pose. I'm sorry, just zooming in here. The hand placement over here is also somewhat uncomfortable looking. So when you look at the back of the hand when it's bent over like that, you really want to be able to bring that hand up and have it sort of just resting gently around the face and cupping it, so you don't have this sort of, or it's almost awkward. I think that's the word that I'm looking for there. So you do want to try and pose that. It is keeping the baby's hand up but that's, that's head up, sorry, that's fine, but it's just creating softer lines when bringing the attention towards the face. So anything that's sort of coming up towards the face, which is where you want the eye to land, they're leading lines bringing you into that space. So when it sort of comes up and it becomes quite awkward and uncomfortable, it takes your eye then away from the face. So it's also created shadows in this area here, which is a dark area that is distracting towards that beautiful little face. What I tend to do, you can see that the light is coming in from this side. I tend to kind of turn the baby's face towards that light source and then position the chin away from the light. So if the light is here, turn the baby's face towards the light, then bring the chin away from the light. That's going to be able to direct that light source across the baby's face to create beautiful sort of shadows and everything. What that also does is that it connects the head with the shoulder over here. So bringing that head away, we're lighting this part of the body, the neck and the shoulder, and it is brighter than the baby's face. So you want to turn that baby's face towards the light to light it, not other areas of the baby, if that makes sense. And I know, look, honestly, I've worked with some babies that are so touchy, and I had a baby in here the other day, and the hands, every time I touched the hands, it would sort of like jump and do things like that. And I know every baby's different, and it's easier said than done, but they're just little things that I'm always looking for when I am posing. So if I get a baby that's a little touchy, I get that safe shot, and then I come back in and I make some adjustments, and then I look for different camera angles as well. So it's always important to make sure that we're always looking to perfect those poses, but we don't want to push the baby, obviously, to a point where there's no return, if that makes sense. How are we going? We got many people?
Really good, really good. Over 100.
Good morning, everyone, or good evening, wherever you are. And I hope you're all enjoying this. Let us know where you're from. If you've got any questions about what I'm talking about, pop it into the comments. Garrett will interrupt me. Let me take a sip of my coffee and ask me a question.
Yes. Therese actually mentioned that there are issues with the new update for Adobe and Wacom.
Well, you've updated, haven't you?
It automatically.
See, this is why Kelly doesn't update.
Automatically updates, yes. And dealing with all the new
I'm sitting here going, why is this not working? That's all right. I'm using the trackpad. It still works.
Sean said he definitely needs to get babies lower as well. So you were talking
putting
about
that bottom down, lower
down.
Inside the prop. Yep. Absolutely.
So lots coming through.
Did anyone else's feed just skip backwards? Mine didn't, but I'm not watching it. So, like I said before we started, you can come in later and re-watch this. It's recorded and it stays right here in the group as well. So you can go and make coffee if you feel like you've missed anything and want to come back and watch it. It's all going to be here. Alrighty. Oh, and just one last comment about this image. The styling is lovely. I think I mentioned it before, but just in case I didn't, the tones are really quite soft and pretty. Okay, let's move on to our next image. That smile. I love baby's goofy smiles. All right, I think the styling here and the use of this really soft fabric is quite pretty. One thing that when you are doing this particular pose that you do have to be careful of is that you don't eliminate a lot of that body and it doesn't just become head and shoulders. You want to see more of the body, and that way, it's not so sort of what's the word I'm looking for, disconnected in terms of the rest of its body. I can also see here that the light coming in from this side, and I just mentioned it before, that when the light is coming in and the chin is towards that light, the light is going to come straight up the nose. So what we've got to do is turn the chin away from the light. Here comes Ali, say good morning. You want to turn that chin away from the light source and bring that face around on a 45-degree angle towards the light. That little smile is absolutely perfect though. When it comes to wrapping this particular pose, I can see here that it's just a little loose here around the top of the neck and shoulders. You want to pull that wrap just a little bit tighter. But what I always like to do when I am wrapping a baby like this is put my fingers down just under the chin and make sure that I can move that wrap and that where the baby can move. The more you layer, the more you sort of pull that wrap a little bit tighter, the firmer it will be and the more supportive it will be. You do just have to keep an eye on those hands and the tightness of that, because if you do wrap a baby too tight in this pose, you can restrict their breathing, their airflow, by putting pressure on that chest area. So be careful of that. And another square crop. These are really quite interesting because we don't often see these. Just be careful when you are cropping images like this to show to your client. If they order a 5x7, if they order a 12x8 print, if they order a 20x30 canvas, and you've already cropped it as a square, you're going to have some problems. So I always make sure that I keep my images full frame when I'm showing my clients, and then that way if they order a different type of crop, I've got all of that extra space in the image if I need it to change the cropping of it. So just keep that in mind when you are cropping. But yeah, and also with that headband, it's just sitting a little too on that hairline. Just pull it back into the hair so that it doesn't create, a line, a border almost, because it's very dark on one side of the headband and very bright on the other side of the headband. So just pull it back into that hairline a little more so it doesn't look like the top of the head is detached from the face. But yeah, skin tones are lovely in pink. They're matching the background, which is lovely. Alrighty. Oh, I love the expression on Mum's face, and that headpiece is just beautiful. It's got lots of beautiful rainbow colours in it, and I'm not sure if there's a connection there with, her being pregnant with a rainbow baby or something like that. The one thing that I am noticing here is this composition and crop. When we look at this higher perspective here, when we're photographing pregnant women, when we're standing on something quite high above them, whilst this is a really great camera angle for her face, what it's done is it's really shortened her. It's sort of you really want to elongate women. It's a lot more flattering, and it's a lot more slimming as well. So just come down a little lower and get them to lift their chin just a bit higher there. Also with that crop, we've just cropped through the bottom of her foot there, so just tilting that camera down when you're shooting to give a little bit more space there. As we have a look, what I try to do in terms of my rule of thirds, especially when I'm photographing a woman upright like this, I'll probably kind of crop it about there and have her just off center somewhat. And I usually have more space on the side of the body that's going, to like the way that the body is posed in position towards that negative space. That's what I'm looking for, those words. And yeah, having her a little bit more straight on and not so crooked, but allowing the space at the bottom of the frame for the rest of the dress to hit the floor and not lead you outside of that frame. So just be careful of that.
While you're talking about cropping and that sort of thing, Diana asks, what do you mean by full frame?
So when I'm taking my shot in camera, that's pretty like everything I see in camera, that's pretty much my full frame crop. It's usually like a 3:2 ratio for me. And then that way, if somebody wants a different ratio of crop in terms of print size, then I've got the maximum amount of information that I need to be able to print that file. If you're taking photos and then cropping them in post-production, you're eliminating a lot of the information from that file. You're reducing the file quality. So what you want to do is make sure you get that composition and that crop right in camera. Obviously, there's going to be differences in terms of, crop sensors and all of that kind of stuff, depending on your camera make and model. We're not going to go into that here. But when I talk about cropping an image in camera, I'm using a full frame sensor. So what I see in my camera is what I'm going to get in terms of that final print. I try not to crop my images too much in post-production. Sometimes I might need to if I've just sort of missed the mark or I've taken that shot really quickly. But when you take the time to get that composition and that crop right in camera, then you've got the maximum amount of file information to work with later on in terms of that print. And that's what I work towards. I'm not a digital photographer in that sense, in terms of taking the shots and giving away the digital files. Even my models, when they come in, they get prints. Everyone that gets a photo taken by me walks away with a print in their hand, because that's what's going to last, that's what's going to hang on the wall, not a USB. So I always make sure that every time I click that shutter, I've got in the back of my mind what that print is going to look like and how much information I've got to work with in terms of that file size. So yeah, lots of other things to consider there. But I talk about all of that in my Getting It Right in Camera, which is really, really important. So yeah, just be careful not to crop in there, lower that perspective. I think you've done a great job in terms of the direction of light coming in there. Having her face a little bit more towards that light source would be great. There's also this one little line that's coming down here, the seam of the dress. That can be a little tricky to remove in post-production, but what I sort of tend to do is come in and use my spot healing brush, or I use my patch tool. So I'll go in and I'll try and eliminate that line or soften it to some degree. But it is hard when you've got lace and things like that. Also, when you're using things like the the little slip that's underneath here, the lace, it's a very large block of solid tone, which is quite distracting. So possibly either have something that goes from the waist all the way down, or have them wear skin-coloured underwear, and then that way it's easier to blend. And by lifting that leg, you're covering any, parts of the groin area that they don't want visible. But if you're going to go lacy, go lacy. But I always recommend my maternity clients bring skin-coloured bra and underpants with them. And you can also get really cheap from places like Target and Kmart, skin-coloured slips that start with little thin straps on the shoulders and come all the way down if you are using that see-through lace, for people who want to be just that little bit more modest.
Just a little update on the Facebook feed. A few people are having problems with it freezing. It is actually going through perfect here in Australia, but I just did a quick little Google search, and there are some issues with Facebook Live at the moment. So
do you know, it's been a week of internet hell.
It's affecting everyone. So
Google has had massive outages, YouTube, Vimeo, all these different platforms, and what they're doing are major updates. And this happens every once in a while with all technology. They've got to, they're always looking to advance ways on how they do things. They're always trying to improve security, all of that sort of thing. I think Robert was having a conversation the other day with Facebook, and they were talking about, all the different updates that are coming along. With the amount of people that are on social media, you really do have to be a little more understanding in terms of why all of these updates happen, because with the over 2 billion users, active users, they've got to continually try to make sure that everything's secure and things are happening. But yeah, our feed is going through. It could be internet in your location in terms of your speed, all of that kind of stuff. So it may buffer and it may stop and freeze. But just be patient. You can always come back and rewatch later on if you want to go to bed, or if you're just waking up and you've got kids to get to school. All right, let's keep going. I love this little love heart in here, and the composition here is really quite lovely with the placement of the baby. I'm looking at the histogram. We've got detail in the highlights, so it's not overexposed, even though there are some brighter areas of the image. If we have a look over here, we've got some brighter areas just in terms of where that light is coming in and hitting the higher points in the background, where it goes up and down in terms of the peaks and troughs. So we've obviously got, a bit of height over here where the light's coming in and hitting it. This is another one of those situations where, when I'm positioning the baby and I'm considering the direction of that light, I always try to position the baby's head closest to the light source. So if the light's coming in from over here and it's hitting the bottom of the wrap here, it's going to be brighter. If it's hitting the feet here, they're obviously going to be nice and bright. But you can see the shadows over here that this is creating. And the little baby's face, even though it's turned towards that light source, it's not the main focal point of this image. The little love heart and the little headband, obviously two brighter parts within this area where the baby's positioned, they're going to catch your eye first. And then you've got to look down in here towards that little baby's face to see it. And we're only seeing half of the baby's face. So what I would do is position the baby's face over here and then the body this way. And then I turn that baby's face back towards that light source. And because then that way when you're shooting from above, you're going to be able to see all of that baby's face. It is a little tricky to remember when you're posing and you're positioning the baby, but just consider when you are positioning the baby where that light source is. If this is artificial light, move it over here and then add some supports. Let me get rid of some of these red marks. Move the light source, if it's artificial, over to this side. Add some supports underneath the baby's face to lift that chin up towards the ceiling so you can see more of that face. But yeah, in terms of crop, I think you've done a great job with the placement of the baby in the frame. You know, the baby moves beautifully through the frame and into that negative space. One last thing. Just be careful of those skin tones. You've got beautiful creamy warm skin tones up here, and then the tone just shifts a little down into the feet where it's a little pinkier, a little bluer, a little cooler in tone. So just warm that up and it'll be a little bit more consistent throughout the entire body. That face is just gorgeous. So this is another example here of the direction of light. We've talked a lot today on lighting. So you can see that light is coming in over here. One thing that I want to point out is when you are looking at the direction of that light, I always make sure the shadow that's on this side of the nose is coming down. So there should be no highlights underneath the bottom of the nose. The highlight should be on the side of the nose over here, not down here. And that's going to be a little more flattering. So you just want to turn that prop a little more. So if the light's there, turn the prop so the baby's head is the top of the baby's head is somewhat closer to that light source. Bring that chin away from the light. We've got a really kind of bright contrasting setup here in terms of styling. So we've got whitish sort of grey floors, then we've got a white cream blanket around the baby, then we've got quite a dark wrap, and then another sort of mid-tone in terms of the hat that's on here. Whilst I'm enjoying it, just be very careful in terms of that exposure, because this can be very hard to get that exposure right. So down here inside the bucket, we've got some really dark shadows. That's because the light source is not going to hit that area. So therefore, the camera, even though to your eye you might have been able to see all of those beautiful, all of the beautiful details in that shadow, the light source is not going to hit that, and your camera's dynamic range is not going to be able to capture all of the detail in those shadows like our eye can see it. So you do have to be careful when you are selecting the props and the color tones that you're going to use with that. So what I would have done is probably selected a darker background and a somewhat darker wrap to go around the baby, so that everything is a darker tone and the baby's face is the brightest part of the image. Even though the baby's face is the closest part of the setup to the camera, to the lens, there's still a lot of contrast going on here in terms of this highlights and shadows that are distracting. They can take away from the baby and not make the baby the hero of the shot. So you do need to be careful of that. If you're using a light background and a light, what do you call that? a furry blanket. I don't know, my words aren't
coming.
coming. I would have gone with probably a lighter wrap so that it wasn't so contrasty. And you can look here at the exposure in terms of the histogram. So we've got all of the shadows down here where we're very close to the edge of our histogram, which means that there's going to be very little detail. When you print this file, there's in terms of all of these shadows down here, it's going to be very dark and it won't print much detail. When we look at the highlights up here, they're very close to the end. Let me bring up my curves palette very quickly so you can see more of that histogram a little better here. Now if I hold the Alt key in and I move this white slider, hang on, I'll move this over a bit more, you can see where we're starting to lose all of that information. And it's where that light is coming in and hitting the edge of the blanket here. So that's a very, very bright area in terms of visual connection with the eye. So if we zoom in and have a little look here, you can start to see that there's not a lot of texture, not a lot of detail there. Whilst there's a difference in tone, the camera is not able to pick up any more detail because we've really pushed that exposure too far. So just be careful when you are photographing really contrasting tones in terms of your styling, because they can be distracting. That was a very long-winded explanation.
Liz is loving the critiques. She thinks they're absolutely awesome, and would just like to know how she can submit in the future.
So every month you can see the banner at the top of this group. If you're on your device, it'll be a little hard, but if you have a look at the banner at the top of the group, it's got the dates for the next 6 months right up until December, and we usually call for submissions 2 days before the critique, and I do that just by posting here in the group, and then I share a link when I open submissions. You do have to keep an eye out for it. That's why you've got to make sure you hit that you receive notifications for the group. For me, I know it's a busy group, so most people turn off notifications, but if you are turning off notifications, you're missing a lot of stuff. So just get used to seeing lots of notifications, as I do every day. Following along and anticipating when I'm going to open that up. But it's also really important that people understand I'm in Australia, and I can't always do these critiques when it's the perfect time for people on the other side of the world. You know, I've got 3 kids and run a business, so I tend to do these at about 8 o'clock in the morning when it suits our work life here. And also I open submissions up usually later in the afternoon, which is better for people on the other side of the world. But there's a great website called Time and Date. You can go there and you can punch in the time that I put in, and it tells you what time it is in your part of the world. Okay. Wrapping technique, lovely. Positioning in the bucket's really great. Just be careful of those contrasts. Alrighty. That is a beautiful little headband there. So first thing I've noticed is that we've got a big slope going down. So when you are looking for those camera angles, just try a few different techniques in terms of how you position that baby in the frame when you're looking through that viewfinder. Because at the moment, the baby to me looks like it's going to slide off the edge of the page. So you want to give that baby just a little bit more balance. When I'm looking for composition with a baby in this pose, you can still have them on somewhat of an angle, just don't have them, you know, diagonal, so diagonal that they do look like they're going to slide off the edge of the frame. So I've just rotated that baby, moved them down into that bottom right-hand corner in terms of composition, created some negative space in the background here. The face is going towards that negative space. This is what we always want. We want that eye to lead you into the negative space, and position the baby down into the bottom. I'll do that again. Bottom part of the frame. And then that way, when we look at our rule of thirds, you know, I always try to position the baby's face, you know, in these axis points, and they're great for, you know, impact in terms of where you want the viewer's eye to lead, and in terms of balance. When I position the baby in this particular pose, or in the bum up pose, for example, I'm always looking to have the baby in the bottom 2/3 of the frame. That way, the negative space is going to be behind the baby, which is where it should be. Especially if you're photographing at, say, 2.8 with a very wide aperture, and you're going to get that beautiful depth of field. If you've got the baby positioned up there and you've got negative space in front of the baby and you're shooting wide open, you're going to create very sort of blurry, large space in front of the baby, which is going to be distracting. So you always want that space to be behind the baby in terms of the placement, which is literally just rotating the camera from left to right to get that baby on the right plane, and then lifting the camera up and down to where you want to position that baby in terms of the bottom 2/3 of the frame, or in the center of the frame, or whatever it is that you're looking for. But in terms of balance, that's what I'm always looking for. Skin tones are a little cool, and so you could warm those up, and it just looks to be just a little underexposed in terms of those skin tones. So the skin tones over here on the arms, you know, they're quite lovely, but the face, just the light just seems to be missing that baby's face. So just be careful of that. You can see that the light, if we come in and have a look at the little shadows here, we've got some shadows underneath the fauna, the floral headband. Fauna? Good Lord.
Another coffee.
No, I have not. There's no alcohol in there, I promise. So it looks like that light is quite high. So just kind of bringing that baby's face around and up towards that light source, that chin up towards the light, so the light is going to hit more of the face, because it just seems to be just missing that face. You can lighten that a little more in post-production. You're shooting on quite a light, high-key background, so be careful of that. But yeah, just lifting some of that exposure there on that face in terms of the direction of that light, and a little bit more in post-production, and you'll be fine. Posing, placement of hands is absolutely lovely. Done a great job there. Alrighty. Okay, so when I'm looking at a bum up pose, the one thing that is quite tricky to get nailed every time is that camera angle, because, you know, we want that baby to be kind of square onto the camera, and from here what I can see is we're just that little bit higher shooting down, so you need to come down a little lower, and that's going to bring the baby's face up more towards the camera. And then you want to move your body slightly around, so that instead of where's my little cursor, instead of shooting, you know, in this way, in terms of your camera angle, you want to be shooting more from here. So you want to get down just a little bit lower. This is going to eliminate the size of the butt, but it's going to show you more of that baby's face, which is what we want to see. This is where we're having a large surface area of a brighter skin that's brighter than the baby's face. So in terms of that camera angle, it's really important that you come down lower and around more towards the top of that baby's face, but it's also really important that you turn the baby towards that light source, so the face is coming up towards that light. You can darken this area down in post-production, but you really do need to get that direction of light right in camera when it comes to the face. This is the brightest part of the image down here, so you do need to be careful of that. When it comes to positioning the little feet, it can be a little tricky. This baby doesn't look like a small baby, like I'm just assuming that. And bigger babies, you know, can be a little trickier to get those legs just perfectly tucked underneath. So what I like to do is get those feet, my hands up underneath the shins, position those knees shoulder width apart, and tuck that little foot there up a little higher underneath that thigh and behind the knee. When you do that, you can lift the bottom higher, and you can stack those feet so you can see more of the heel and the foot underneath the baby there. So it's pulling them out and just stacking them. Obviously, you know, you can try and put a baby in that pose over and over again. And they're going to tuck their feet back up, they're going to pull them away, they're going to move. That's fine. What I do in that situation is I get that safe shot, I come back in and I rearrange the feet, and then I use more supports underneath the baby here to keep those feet and legs positioned. Every single baby's going to lie differently in this pose. With the bum up, we want to try and get that nice sort of curve in the back. You're going to have some babies that want to have a round back. It's all dependent on that baby, so you just need to be careful, but you are so close to perfecting that pose. The hand placement under the face is really lovely. When we look at the composition, just be careful not to constrain that baby too much. You want to give it a little bit more space. So in terms of in camera, you know, add a little bit more space from the top of the baby's head to the bottom and around the bottom of the frame as well. I always try to keep an even distance from the bum to the edge and the head to the edge and the arms and legs to the edge in terms of balance. So, but that way you're just giving that baby just that little bit more room to move, and it doesn't look so constrained. So we've got a fair amount of background, but again, lowering that camera angle, coming down, you'll eliminate some of that background as well. Oh, so sweet. All right. So I love her little expression here. I think this is really, really lovely. Having a look here, we can see this little catch light here in her eye. When you're photographing little girls, try to bring that light just that tiny bit higher. So here, I can see the catch light is coming in, which means the direction of light is coming sort of quite flat side on. So you want to elevate that light so it's coming down from that perspective, because you can see the shadow is here, where the shadow should be just falling off a little bit lower down there. It is hard when you're using strobe to see that, but that way you can, I'm assuming most modeling lamps you can turn up a little brighter and you can start to see where those shadows fall, but always just try to have that light placement a little higher. You're going to get a catch light that's going to be a little bit higher here in the eye. That's what you want to look for. But what I always like to do when I'm photographing portraits like this is just have some form of light being bounced in. So if we zoom back out, this is where I would have a reflector over this side of the frame, bouncing some light back in over here. This is going to create another little catch light down here. And this is where you're going to start to see that beautiful, beautiful portrait lighting. So experiment with that. Really, you know, I think she looks lovely, but I think she looks quite stiff as well. So you can see the little muscles in her arms, and she's quite sort of strong, but she's got this lovely soft expression on her face, but she's quite a strong pose. So you want to make sure that both of those match in terms of how you position them. Sometimes when you tell a child to stand there and hold a bunch of flowers, it can look quite forced and posed. So this is where you kind of need to connect a little more with them and find out more about them to get that beautiful connection in camera. Give them something to hold and just say, like for example, you know, ask them, what's your favorite flower? What's your favorite colored flower? Connect them back to what it is that they're holding, and they'll start to hold it in a way. And I want you to pull those flowers in really tight to you. You know, tell me about what it is that you love about those flowers. And little girls will connect and they'll start to answer and have that conversation with you, and you can get a much more natural, relaxed response from them, I suppose, is what I'm looking for. Also, just be careful when you are shooting, again, brighter tones in terms of the skin, that you're not going to overexpose those highlights. You can see over here in terms of our histogram, we've got a lot of information that's very close to the edge there, so it is quite bright. The skin tones here, you know, if we have a look at our histogram in curves, and we have a look, we've click on the little hand. This is a great little tip as to where the information in the file sits. So the shadows over here, you can see, are sitting on that histogram they're quite dark. We move the shadows on this side of the face, and then you've got the skin tones over here on one side of the face, so they're quite bright. So this is where we need to bring in a reflector to add some more light to the shadows on the other side of the face so that they're not so contrasty. Down here in the flowers, you can see the information there is really quite high in that histogram. It's sitting right up here. And then you've got down here in the shadows of the hair, some really dark shadows there. So be careful when you are shooting lighter tones in terms of the dress and the flowers on those darker backgrounds, because if you're not bringing in any other terms of reflective light, you're going to end up with a very contrasting portrait, and it doesn't quite suit this style of photography. So you want something a little softer for little girls, especially when you're bringing in flowers. But I think you're onto something. Just get them to relax a little more. And with the feet, it looks like she's obviously sitting on something, but her legs are going down. Bring them something else to put underneath their feet, even if it's just one foot, bringing one leg up higher and just creating a bit more of a shape here between the different legs and the separation there. All right, beautiful pose. It does look a little overlit in some areas. You can see here in the histogram the background is quite bright. Again, let's bring up our curves. And you can see over here that the information in the blanket here is really quite bright. So if we start to have a look at where we're losing information, there's a lot of detail there in the bonnet, and you can see some highlights on the cheek there. And if we have a little look, starting to see some on that bottom thigh. So just be really, really careful when you are shooting on these wider backgrounds. Yes, if you want them white, it can be really tough, but you do have to be careful that you're not lifting that exposure so much that you're going to start to lose some detail in those skin tones in terms of some of those highlights. Bottom half of the baby here is quite bright in this area in comparison to the baby's face. So all I would recommend here is just turning that baby a little bit more around towards that light source so the light hits the face, because at the moment it's coming down and it's hitting the top of the baby's head. You really want it to come down around towards that baby's face, so just turning that baby around a little more. Yeah, in terms of skin tones, the skin tones in the face are beautiful. There's a few red tones back here in the little feet, so just reducing those and warming them up. When you remove red tones, be careful that you don't make them look too grey and kind of flat. You do need to warm those back up. But the posing is absolutely lovely. I love the styling. It's just, the hat's just so simple. It's been placed there. I think you're onto something. If we have a look at the composition, baby's in the bottom 2/3. There's a beautiful amount of distance from edge to edge and a little bit there. You could bring them down just a tad to give that little bit more space there, but otherwise absolutely beautiful. Only other thing that I will say about that background is that when you're shooting quite high key like this, you've got shadow around the baby and you've got detail in that blanket. But where you start to come to the edge of the frame, there's not a lot of detail in terms of texture. So as we come around the baby, it's quite soft here. We've obviously, sort of softened the edges there and painted over that background. Just be careful that you're not losing all of that texture and detail, so that the baby, is not sort of sitting in amongst nothing, I suppose. You need to keep a little bit more of that texture and detail in there. But great job. Alrighty. Okay, we've got so much negative space going on here, which I kind of like in terms of something that's really different. And if you zoom out, and it's quite a lonely sort of setup and styling and composition. There's so much around the baby here, and it's not that I'm not enjoying it, it's just why So there's got to be a little bit more story and connection towards the reason for having so much space around the baby here. If you also have a look at the background, it seems to be a lot sort of darker here and then a lot lighter here. Oops, that was a bit wonky. A lot lighter there. So if you are going to have so much space around the baby, you don't want it to be distracting. You don't want people's eye to kind of go, okay, well, what's going on here? Why is it darker there when we can clearly see that the direction of light is coming in from that side of the frame? So just even out the tones in that background, and just make sure that if you are sort of, and I can see that like a filter has been used over this, but even though a filter has been used, you need to keep the amount of texture and detail consistent throughout that background, especially if you are cloning or placing different parts of the background in multiple areas. You want to keep the texture in terms of the detail and they're nice and consistent. So you can see there's just a little bit of repetition kind of going on there in terms of cloning. So we've got, the same kind of pattern going on here in terms of repetition down here. So you can use a 50% grey layer, you can darken some of those highlights down and make it a little bit more consistent. But if you were going to do this type of setup, what I would do is photograph the baby on that background, and then I would have the baby go away, not go away, but take the baby away, wrong choice of words, and then photograph that background separately. And then in post-production, you can use that background to add, to create more space around the baby. That's another way to do it too. When I look at, and I zoom out, when I zoom back in, like obviously I can see that the brightest part of the image is that baby's face, but when I zoom in, the hand is actually brighter. So just be careful in terms of the intensity and the direction of that light, that you're not taking away from that face. So you want to darken that little hand down if you can. But yeah, in terms of the position of the baby, I think it looks, comfortable. I think the wrapping is lovely. You've tried something that's really different, unique, and I really want to encourage you to continue to do that. Another thing that I'm looking at here in terms of composition is baby is placed, beautifully in the center there, but it looks like it's just slightly off. If you straighten the baby in the frame, bring it into the center, then it's going to be a little more balanced. So we go before and after, just straightening that baby in the frame. If you are going to be, keep it really centered and have it symmetrical as well. But I love seeing new, creative, different, unique things. Okay. All right, look at that beautiful baby. So first thing that I can see here is how bright a lot of the highlights are. We've got some really bright highlights where the light is coming in down quite low and it's hitting the side of that posy. What happens then is that the posy comes up and then it goes down into the well of the middle where the baby is. The light is coming straight across, but it's not coming down in to light that baby. It's just drifting across the top of that baby. So you need to lift that light, if it's an artificial light, and direct it down in towards the actual baby. If it's natural light, what I would do is block, if it's natural light and it's a window that goes to the floor, I would block, say, 2 feet of the bottom of that window. So that you're stopping the light coming in across the floor and across the bottom there, and directing it down more in terms of where the baby is positioned, because at the moment it's really contrasty. You've got highlights going on over here, you've got really dark shadows over there. You're going to eliminate that by lifting that light source. The posing of the baby is just lovely. The placement of that little finger on its foot is just beautiful. And I can see here how you've tried to kind of add, some flowers into the background. You've got the beautiful flower headband on there. Maybe if the background tone was the same as the cream, that would have probably been a little bit more complementary. But because you've got dark shadows over here in the background, and then you've got white flowers, what they're becoming is quite distracting, and then you've got a couple coming out of the edge of the frame. So be really careful in terms of that styling, that again, sometimes less is best. When we try to add more elements, they can become distracting, so they just kind of pull your eye away from that frame. When we are photographing props like this, I know if you cannot get enough space around them, if you've got a fixed prime lens, it can be very difficult without having to stand on something to get enough space around the baby. But as that's just kind of hitting the edge of the frame there and there, in terms of composition, it is quite distracting. So you just want to add just that little bit more, hang on, where's my crop? A little bit more space above and below the baby. So yeah, just to make sure that it doesn't feel so constrained and is distracting there. Posing of the baby, like I said, is lovely. Just a little bit of a tilt of the baby's head there, and possibly just turning the baby slightly onto the side so that they don't look so straight. You want to give them a little bit more of a curly shape. So just be careful of that. All right. And when it comes to those skin tones, there is a fair amount of red there in that baby's skin tone. I know some babies are redder than others, but when you underexpose a baby, the red tones will become more prominent. So these really contrasting highlights and shadows with the direction and the intensity of that light, they're creating, some sort of red tones there in the skin that can be quite sort of problematic when it comes to creating beautiful, soft, warm skin tones and evening that out. When you start to reduce it, it can look grey and flat, quite similar to some of the grey tones down here in the feet. So you do need to be careful, but getting that light right will help with those skin tones. That's probably the biggest key point to take away from this. Learning that lighting, and I know that it's hard, but practice. Like, get a balloon and put a balloon inside here and practice the direction of that light, and then you'll be able to see where the light is hitting that balloon. Get a soft toy, get anything that you can put in there, a loaf of bread, something that you can start practicing and playing with the direction and the intensity of that light. You may need to move that light further away, soften it, feather it, direct that to the modifier a bit more, but you're going to learn that in a lot of my lighting techniques that I use in my classes, as well as the lighting tutorials that are on newborn posing. And be patient with yourself. All right. Posing, lovely. Love the hand placement here. Direction of the light coming across that little baby's face is lovely. I just would have had it turned just a little bit more towards that light source there. Because as you can see, it's quite bright up here above the baby's head and quite dark sort of down here. So you can see the shadows there coming straight down. They're the key giveaway as to the direction of that light. So what you want is the shadows to be falling off behind the baby as that light comes in across the baby's face from a higher perspective. That's what we're always looking for there. And if you just rotate your camera slightly to the left, you'll be able to lift that baby just that little bit higher in the frame, so that it doesn't look so flat, giving it a little bit of shape. But yeah, I think you've done a great job with the wrapping. This part of the wrap that is coming down and around and into the bottom is kind of then leading you up into like a little bit of a messy kind of area up there. So just keep an eye on some of those lines that can be distracting and pull your eye away from the main subject, because you've used a beautifully toned background and wrap here, and that baby's face really stands out, but you've got some leading lines that have become contrasty in terms of highlights and shadows that are taking your eye away from the baby. We've also got, it looks, just be careful when you lift the blanket up on your posing bag behind the baby, just kind of give it a bit more of a graduated. So how do I explain this?
I'll go full screen.
I like to have the blanket kind of, so if this is my posing bag here, and I've got my blanket across the back of the posing bag, I wouldn't have that backdrop come straight up behind the bag. I have that backdrop come and sort of gradually drift off into the background at a lower angle. Because when I'm shooting from a higher perspective down, I don't need all that height behind the baby. So I want that backdrop to sort of drift off into the background. Then you're not, and it's not going to look like you've got a wall behind the baby. It's also going to eliminate some of these heavier shadows from where the light is sort of falling off in terms of the height of that background, if that makes sense. Yeah, but good job. Alrighty. I really love this background. Okay, so we do have a lot of background here, and I just feel that she's a little, I feel like I want to see more of the bottom half of her. I'm not quite sure in terms of her placement here in the frame with so much space. Possibly a little less space around her would then allow the framing of that tulle to kind of do its job a little better. I'm not sure, but yeah, I either want to see more of it because it comes in here and here, it comes in here, but then we've got this, and I feel like I want to see more of that almost. I'm not quite sure, but I do love the idea of using that frame, that tulle, sorry, to create a frame, a beautiful circular frame around Mum and the baby. Now Mum is looking, you know, beautifully into the camera. There's great eye contact there, but there just seems to be not a lot of contact between her and the baby. Not a lot of it looks like the baby's just been placed there. That you can see the affection in her face, but it doesn't continue to show that throughout the pose and the placement of the baby. So the baby's down quite low, and you can see a lot of this area up here in terms of that lace, which is quite pretty, but I don't think it's necessary. So what I would have done is place that baby, and let me just, because my Wacom's not working, let me just bring, let me try something just to show you what to look for next time, because I think that you're doing something really quite lovely here and trying something different. All right, so bringing that baby up a little higher, and don't do this in post-production, but I just want to show you. I want to show you just how I would kind of visualize the placement of this to be. Very quickly, because we're getting towards the end of our images here. And this is like the roughest job ever, but just to give you an idea. Okay, so bringing that baby up higher creates more connection, and then you can bring Mum's head down to rest on the top of that baby. And then what you can do is come in a little tighter and get all of that beautiful sort of tulle around her and remove some of that unnecessary background, even though it's a beautiful color, and make it all about Mum and that baby and that connection. So I feel that that's what this is missing. When we go back to that image, I feel like the baby is just way down too low and the hands look somewhat uncomfortable and disjointed. Bring that baby up, and then you've got that beautiful connection between the two of them that are touching, and that's gonna, that lovely connection and the love that you can see in her eyes is gonna follow through with the pose and the positioning of that baby up much higher. And then use that tulle to wrap around them. Cover the hands with that tulle as well in terms of all of this, because we don't really need to see all of that. Tulle is see-through, so cover the hands to a degree where you can still see them, but you're eliminating some of that distraction away from the baby there, because that is quite a distracting area of the image when you consider those hands. They're quite bright, the skin tones are different to the baby's face is quite dark. So what you want to do is make sure that the light source, you can see that the light's coming in and it's missing this part, so no light is hitting that there because it's dark. The light is hitting the top of the nose. So what you need to do is get that baby up higher and then turn a little more towards that light source. You can even see here in the reflections here in the eyes, that light is sort of coming in quite side on. If you'd turned a little more towards the light, you would have softened these shadows a little more, and it would have been a bit more flattering. All right. Oh, look at that. Okay, I really do love the use of little props and things like that. Do you know what though? You don't need this one. Different era. You've got a little wooden toy truck, and you've got a little wooden airplane, and then you've got a plastic farm truck. So to stick with the consistency of a theme, for example, I would have got rid of the one that's on him and just kept those two there, because if you have a look here, you've got little wooden buttons that tie in with the little wooden toys. So it all makes sense and it connects in some way. So I think that that's lovely. Maybe even something else wooden down here in the hands if you need that third object. But when you think of when you are designing, and I learnt this in interior designing, you should always have things grouped in threes. So you don't need the little truck in there, even though you've got 1, 2, 3 toys. You've got 1, 2, 3 wooden elements in terms of the buttons. So you're tying it in with the outfit. So that little truck there, probably not so necessary. And these straight lines going, through, like pretty much horizontally across the background there, are just a little distracting. So softening those down just a tad will be very beneficial there. The posing of the baby is lovely. That baby's face is very clear and visible. I feel that this is just a lovely naturally placed baby. I probably would have had, with that light coming in from this side, I would have had the baby's head over here and the body coming down in this direction, and not the other way. So just remember to bring that baby's head closest to that light source. But yeah, sometimes less is more. So when I'm adding different elements to tell story or create connection and stuff like that, obviously these are all little toys that he's going to play with as he gets older. So I always put things in and then I take them away. So that way I've got the option later on. So just remember that when you are using things. But in terms of the grey background, the grey fur and the little grey outfit, I love the styling of all of that. It's beautiful. Just a few other things to consider, and those skin tones are gorgeous too. Oh, I've done that one. I didn't close it. All right. Our last image. Really enjoying this kind of wrap. That baby's in a beautiful, little tight ball. It looks absolutely lovely. It's been done with intention. The one thing that's really distracting is just how bright that background is. And you can see over here in the histogram, there's so much information there. If we bring up our curves, we can have a little look down here at where we're starting to lose all of those highlights. And you can see even the baby's face there in those red skin tones is really quite bright and overexposed. But that background is where, you've got so many bright highlights that it's just, the intensity of it is so contrasty, so bright that it really is distracting in terms of the frame. So you do need to be careful of that exposure. When you are working with different surfaces like this, in areas there are parts of the background that look quite flat, and then you've got other areas where you've got lines. And these are from obviously highlights and shadows from where the light is hitting the blanket. So what you can do there is just lighten some of those shadows. You know, you can create a, hang on, let me create a copy layer. You can lift some of those shadows in the background, add a mask, invert that, and you can paint, I'll reduce the opacity, and you can paint in to some of those shadows and eliminate them. And then that way you're not having to clone them out, you're not having to you know, patch or use the healing brush or anything like that that's going to sometimes mess with the consistency and texture and the detail. So you can eliminate some of those darker kind of shadows around the edge of the frame by just, you know, adding some light in there as well, which will make them less distracting. Placement of the baby's hands is lovely. The shadow here from the tassel of the bonnet is quite distracting. So yeah, turning that baby's face towards the light will bring that tassel down, and you won't have that shadow there on the cheek, and then you'll also have more even consistent light across the baby's face. But you can see that light source is coming, whoopsie, not the one I want. You can see that light source is coming, you know, up and across that baby. So you really do need that light to come down across the baby's face. And I can see that because of the direction of these, shadows here. So you can see that light is sort of creating those shadows in that direction. So you want that light to come down across the baby's face, and it's going to be more flattering. You want it to come from a higher placement, and also you want that light to be softer, because the intensity here is what's creating you know, this high contrast and this brightness as well. But do be careful when you are editing your photos as well. If you are lifting the exposure of your images in post-production, make sure you're always got your histogram open, and you're keeping an eye on areas of that frame that are quite bright as well. So yeah, that is it. That's our images. Thank you, everyone who has stuck around for the morning, the hour and a half that we've been sitting here. Thank you so much for submitting your photos, for those of you that did. I know it's not easy. I saw a couple of comments from people that were a little nervous. There's nothing to be nervous about. The fact that you submitted a photo and you wanted some feedback, some honest feedback, is such a great thing, because it just means that you want to continually improve and push yourself. And you know what? It doesn't end. I still submit photos of mine to competitions and things like that, and the most valuable thing that I get from that is the feedback, because it doesn't matter where you're at in your career, it doesn't matter how long you've been a photographer for, you've got to keep pushing yourself. You are only as good as your last photograph. And you know what? That's a constant daily reminder for us here in the studio, because you know, when we're doing things, especially with me teaching, I've got to be consistent and I've got to be on the ball all the time. You know, there's no cutting corners. I can't be lazy. But also, you know what? It's such an incredible thing to always see yourself progressing and evolving and growing as an artist. Doesn't matter whether you've 6 months in or 6 years in, you know what, you learn from every photo you take, and you learn a lot about yourself as well. So be patient, practice, and be persistent, because yeah, there's so much to do. Hi everybody, I'm reading some of these beautiful comments. Thank you so much. I love being able to do this. It's a lot of fun. Well, it's not fun, but it's such a great way to share. And you know, I've said before in the past, I can't always be in the group all the time offering, you know, feedback and things like that. So this is such a great way for me to do it as in big chunks and get through a lot of images and share as much as I can, because obviously you've seen how much I do like to critique images, and I cover all the different aspects of each photo I open. You know, if I did that every day in the group, that'd be a full-time job, and I don't think anyone's going to pay me to do that. So I've got a family to feed.
Anyway. Lots of people saying thank you very much. They've got so much out of it.
Oh, good job.
So lots of great feedback for people to take away. Even those who didn't submit images, just seeing other people's images, and it could be the same mistake that they've made or whatever it might be, but mistakes are where we learn, so that's really cool.
Absolutely.
The other thing that you announced yesterday as well was more about the rise.
Yeah, so you know what, not everyone's going to be wanting to enter photography competitions, and I've heard so many, and I'll get to that announcement in a second. But there's a good point here. When it comes to people receiving feedback and things like that, I hear a lot of photographers say, oh, you know, but I only care what my clients think, I don't care what judges think. So here, let me fix this misconception for those of you out there that don't really care what judges think. Judges who judge photography competitions are trained. I've been judging internationally all over the world print competitions now for 7 years, and I've been trained to know what to look for in terms of technical excellence. So when a judge looks at a photograph, they're photographers themselves that have clients that understand a client's love of an image, and also understand that a lot of gold awards aren't necessarily the client's favorite image. But what they look for is technical excellence. So everything that I've just critiqued here on the screen, when I go up to judge a print, they're all the same things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for lighting and technical excellence in camera skills. I'm looking for retouching skills. All of those things that I've just talked about here, on a different level, yes, but it is the best playing field for you to get feedback and improve your work, because every time you pick up your camera, whether it's for yourself or for your client, you should be aiming for technical excellence. And that's what we are as photographers. You know, it's a craft and we need to perfect it. It's a skill that we need to train, to learn and understand, and how to be better every day. And that's why, for me, entering photography competitions has made me the photographer I am today, because I wouldn't know what I know now. Even though I've got a diploma in photography and I studied at college, I've learned so much more from other judges, from sitting on panels from other judges, of what they see in terms of technical excellence. So for your clients, you should be aiming for that technical excellence. So for all those people out there that don't care what judges think, they are trained to know what is technically a good photo and what is not. And if we want our industry to survive, if we want our industry to become stronger, and people aren't going to rely on these devices to take their photos every day, if you want to stay in business, you have to become better. You have to be able to create photos that they can't create themselves. Otherwise, you're not a necessity. That you're no longer needed. And I'm sorry, but I love being a photographer so much that I want to earn a living from it. I want to be a photographer that can get up every day and choose to be and earn a living, and be the best that I can be. So learning how to be a technically skilled photographer is of paramount to me and my business. And I think that's what everybody should be striving for every time they pick up their camera. So don't be misguided as to what photography competitions are all about. We have the Rise Awards, and the reason I created them for is all of those things that I've just said. We give feedback on every single image so that you can learn, so that you can grow and achieve more within your business, and have something to look forward to and aspire to, something that drives you. And that's what it's all about, being passionate about your craft, really, really passionate. Because if you don't love it and you're not passionate about it, you shouldn't be doing it. You won't be running a successful business if you don't feel that way. So this is why we've created it, to give people a place to be celebrated for their hard work, for what they're creating and they're achieving. Another thing that Garrett just mentioned before about what it is that we announced yesterday, it's called the Rise Up Award. We want to celebrate people who use photography to give back to their community, who make a difference in other people's lives. Last year, the recipient was Louisa Dunn, and I can tell you, this woman she's a pretty incredible lady. She's given so much of her time, and it's cost her a lot to be able to do what she's done for other people, but she raised and donated up to $120,000 throughout her career to people in need of photography, people, oh gosh, it's such an incredible story. Jump onto the Rise Facebook page, and if you didn't see my post yesterday in the group, so it's the Rise International Photography Awards. It's a Facebook page, you just search for it, and you'll be able to see all the information there, because if you know someone that's made a difference, if you know someone that's impacting other people's lives that deserves to be rewarded, nominate them. This is your chance to actually nominate someone to make a difference, because we're going to give the lucky recipient this year $1,000 to give towards their chosen charity. Because you know what? It's always nice to give back when we can, when we financially can, when we physically can, and this is our way of appreciating people out there that do things and never expect anything in return. So I want you to shine the light on someone you know that's doing that, that's making a difference, and nominate them, please, because we think it's such an incredible way to be a part of this community, to support one another, because we know it's a lonely world. Even though it's a very small world, and this industry can be somewhat small, it is quite lonely sitting behind our computers day in, day out, working on our businesses. So this is a great way for us to support each other and connect. And it makes you feel good.
Yeah, it does.
All right, it is 9:37. I've had my preach for the day.
Amen, sister.
I'm going to go and have another coffee and have a great weekend, everyone. We are photographing 5 families on Saturday and Sunday. Both Garrett and I are giving up our weekend because we are creating a beautiful new tutorial for family posing. Photographing families with newborns, with toddlers, with
grandparents,
multiples,
teenagers.
Everything, teenagers, you name it, lots of different families in different scenarios to share that with you. And just most people with children have children that go to school and are only available on weekends. So we've got a huge weekend planned.
We do.
So we're going to go get ready for that.
Barocca.
Lots of it. He said Barocca, not vodka. All right, have a great weekend, everyone. I will see you again. Make sure you check out that Facebook banner for all of our next Facebook Live critiques coming up. We do one a month, so stay tuned. See ya. Bye.